Good morning, everyone. Mr. Martinez here, and today is May the 4th be with you. Special edition. I hope you're enjoying the effect. I guess it probably should be green because there we go. Anyway, thought you guys would enjoy that. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Mr. Martinez here. We're going to do a lesson on the Age of Enlightenment, and I might remove the video of myself doing it because sometimes the voice doesn't match what you're looking at, and I don't want to look weird doing this. So, but here I am. So we'll do the customary 3, 2, 1. And I'm about to teach you, salute you back, strength and honor. So, as you can see, we're going to be learning about the Age of Enlightenment. And this pretty much is the last major theme of what we've learned all school year. And this is probably the most important items you're going to learn because this directly impacts our rights and what we believe and how it plays out in the world. So hope you enjoy this lesson. I might just leave myself there. I don't know. We'll see how it works out. But this might be in 2 parts. Haven't decided yet. This one's kind of long, but your EQ is right where it needs to be. What was the Enlightenment and what was its effect on the world? Okay? So without no further ado, on May the 4th be with you. Here we go. All right. What does it mean to be enlightened? What does that even mean? Why do we care? What's the point? Well, it means to gain knowledge and wisdom, to be freed from prejudice, ignorance, or superstition. And the idea being is that before a person becomes enlightened, they would be in what's known as darkness. They might have prejudice in the bad sense, ignorance, not knowing what truth is, or even superstition, okay? But when you get enlightened, the lights go on, right? The light goes on, and you see things differently, okay? So that's what enlightenment means. So you can kind of guess what this is going to be about. What is the Enlightenment commonly referred to as? So obviously write down your questions. The Age of Reason, and yes, you need to copy this down in its entirety. Okay? The Age of Reason, 18th century, which is the 1700s. Belief in laws of nature applied to criticism of government and society on the basis of human reason. And the famous thinkers were Locke, John Locke, Baron de Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau, and these gentlemen are very important. I'll highlight those. Their ideas inspired the revolutions like the French Revolution and the American Revolution. In fact, that's probably one of the biggest reasons why we have what we have in the United States of America is because of the Age of Reason. No, it's not. Notice it's not the age of stupidity. Okay? These guys knew exactly what they were saying. They were way, infinitely intelligent gentlemen, okay? And their ideas would shape this country and many other countries around the world. But it's enshrined in our founding documents, which we'll get to later, okay? So what is reason? Give me a reason for the reason, right? To think logically. And those of you that watch science fiction like I do, There's a show that has certain characters that everything must be logical. If it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't make sense. And one of the reasons why people question so many things in society is because, is it truly logical? And if we were in class, I would go more in depth into these ideas. I'm not going to here only because even though I have time to record the lesson, I don't want to belabor the point because I know a lot of you are watching it. But thinking logically is basically you have an explanation, you have cause and effect. This would lead to that. And sadly, most people do not think logically. They usually think emotionally. I feel this way. I feel this way. Instead of being rational and logical. And does it make sense that this would be the case? So we're going to explore this too. How did Enlightenment thinkers differ from scientists? There's an interesting question. They applied reason to the human world, not just the natural world. So here you have a little diagram of how our government works, federal government. Notice president, legislative, judicial, everyone, there is no one above another necessarily. You need to write all this down, okay? They applied reason to the human world. The human world includes government and law. The natural world, scientists applied reason to using the scientific method, and that'll be next week's lesson, just so you know. Our final lesson of the school year. Can you believe that? So this is where we're at. Human world, natural world. When was the Enlightenment? I love this picture. I've always thought this one was cool. When did it occur? 1600 to 1799, or the 17th and 18th centuries. Okay. How were the Enlightenment and Renaissance similar? How were they similar, you might say? I'm wondering how they were similar and what they did to establish the thinking that would permeate society for the next 300 years. They both studied the ideas and art of ancient Greece and Rome. And if you remember, fall of the Roman Empire, all these ideas were lost until the Renaissance. And these ideas came back into being. Drink some water. I know it's in a soda cup, but I fill it with water. So. And these ideas came back in a powerful way. So much so that even if you look at how our government looks, the buildings, Greek and Roman architecture. Okay? So what new form of literature evolved during the Age of Enlightenment? Ooh, we'll get into books, those of you that love to read, right? What new form of literature? And you're going to be surprised at what came about of this. It was the novel. Not just stories, but the actual novel itself. Obviously, Lord of the Rings, Christmas Carol, Watership Down, all wonderful books. Highly recommend reading those. Okay? What was the name of the very first novel? Now, we learned in Japan, the Pillow Book and the other, those are poems, those were narrative stories, but the first self-contained novel came about during the Enlightenment, and it was called Don Quixote. And normally, if we were in school, I would show you the movie. You'd have questions to answer. There are some cartoon versions of it. You can look it up on YouTube and such. But it's such an amazing story, written in Spain. We'll get to that. I'm going to hit myself. Who wrote Don Quixote? I have to remind myself not to get ahead of myself. Who wrote Don Quixote? Cervantes. He was from Spain. And, I always pick a student that this might resemble. And I'm thinking of a person in fifth period who, if they were older and had a little mustache, it could be you. All right? So, Cervantes. What was Don Quixote about? It's about a dreamer, a buffoon, an aging gentleman who sets out from his village of La Mancha to perform acts of chivalry in the name of his grand love, Dulcinea. And here's the version that I usually show. It's really good. Can't get it in the United States. I managed to get it a few years ago. This is the one people normally watch. Basically, he's in the time of the Renaissance, the Enlightenment era, but he longs to go back in time and be a knight during the Middle Ages, and he sets out on this quest to do so. And it is seriously funny. I highly recommend getting the book. It's available in Spanish. It's first language, and you can get it in English. And there is a definitive translation that I would recommend. And maybe I'll show you later. I haven't decided yet, but definitely get a chance to read this book. During the Enlightenment, there were other types of writing. Poetry, myths, histories, plays, political writings. All of these writings came about during the Enlightenment. And these are most of the things that people usually refer to. Shakespeare, scientific writing. All these things came about during this time. Who were the most famous Enlightenment writers? Look at these guys. Hello there. Okay. Well, the first gentleman is Thomas Hobbes. He wrote the Book of Leviathan. If you hear lightsabers in the background, it's my son's playing. I've got a break now, but anyway. He wrote a book about Leviathan. Leviathan represented the powerful government. Okay? He argued what the best form of government was. Okay, now this is going to become what's known as the Lockean Hobbes debate. Hobbes wanted a strong government. Locke wanted a medium government because human rights are more important, and we're going to get to this. But Hobbes, strong central government represented by the Leviathan. He believed the best form of government was absolute, all-powerful, to manage and control behavior. The Leviathan, or sea monster, represents the all-powerful government Hobbes believed exists to avoid chaos. So in other words, in the absence of a government, there would be chaos. People would just do what they wanted, survival of the fittest, and until you had someone to control the behavior of humanity, there'd be destruction. And so he said you need a strong government, represented by Leviathan, to control that behavior. And again, recommend reading this book. Any of these things you can read on your own and enlighten yourself, right? Okay? So, now Locke, on the other hand, he thought differently. He wrote the Two Treatises of Government, another book you can get. And his premise was, get ahead of myself again. What did Locke argue was the best form of government? Democracy. Hey, ancient Greece, right? Locke believed in democracy because he argued the people were sovereign and the people have ultimate power. Does this sound familiar at all? I want you to think about this for a second. Do we live in a society where people are supposed to have the power? Perhaps? Yes. Okay? We actually live in a government that's kind of a combination of the two, and we'll see that in a moment. What were the three rights Locke said government must protect? Now, these are not rights that are given by the government. Notice it says government will protect. Okay? These are rights that we have as humans. life, liberty, property. You've probably heard it, pursuit of happiness, and we'll get to this in a moment. But notice, John Locke believed that everybody, that the rights that we have are to live, no one can take your life, freedom, liberty, interesting what's going on right now, and property, meaning the land you possess, because land is powerful. You can grow your own food, you can cultivate your own items, you can grow trees for wood to make things. I mean, land in the ancient world, in the modern world, was the most important thing. Because if you had land, you had power. Okay? Live free or die. You'll get to that in 8th grade, U.S. history, what that means. So what effects did John Locke have on the United States? I wonder what it was. He influenced the Declaration of Independence. Okay? So this document is what's known as one of the foundational documents that we use in the United States. This is the document where the colonists, the 13 colonies that were colonies of England, laid the case for their independence. And this is a section in this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So in other words, these things are very important. Okay? Go back. Forward. Oh. There we go. Now, normally in class I do a whole thing separately on just this alone. Obviously, I'm going to combine it with this. But the important ideas here are, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident truth is something that is obvious. It's known. You don't need to prove it. It just is true. Okay? You can't argue. It's true. And what is it? All men are created equal. Notice the idea of the founders was that we were created. We didn't evolve. So this is their premise. All men. Now, understand that they weren't limited to men. These phrases meant everyone. Okay? So if you translated it today, you'd probably say humankind. Okay? Created by their Creator with certain rights. Number one, life, freedom, and happiness, meaning what makes you happy. And these rights are fundamental. And the only reason why you have a government is to secure these rights. See? You do not have a government to take care of you. You do not have a government to give you everything or give you rights or take rights. They are there to preserve. And where does the government get its power? From the consent of the governed. So if you're looking around in the news and you see people doing things, keep this in mind, because this is the answer to all those questions. This is the fundamental premise of the United States of America right here. Okay? Now, is this a perfect understanding? Of course not. Obviously, when the founding occurred, people had slaves. People were also free. It was the goal. This is the goal we want to set for this country. Everyone is equal. We may not have the same ability, and I've said this many times in class, but we are equal in who we are as humans. I'm no better than you. You're no better than me. Whether a person is in public office, president, senator, congressperson, doesn't matter. We're all equal. Okay? Some of us have more intellect than others. Some of us have less. Some of us have musical talent. But we are all equal as humans. And the government is here to preserve our rights. Okay? Very important. Okay? Another gentleman, Baron de Montesquieu, He wrote The Spirit of Laws, and he argued the structure of government that we should have is this. Power of government needs to be separated, 3 branches. And this is exactly what we have in the United States. We have the executive branch, represented by the president, legislative, which is Congress, that has 2 houses, the Senate, House of Representatives, and the judicial, highest court being the Supreme Court, and then all the lower courts. Why have separation of powers? Well, okay, why did he advocate for that? In order to avoid one person gaining all the power. No absolutism. And think about it. Whatever a person's opinion is of the president, okay? I can use many presidents as examples, but we have a current president. This president cannot just do whatever they want. They need Congress to propose bills that he can sign into law or veto if he doesn't like them. They have to work together. And then the Supreme Court can say, you know what, this is unconstitutional, or this is constitutional. And right now there are lawsuits going on in the country where people are challenging some of the orders that the governors are doing in light of what the Constitution says. Okay? So this is right now happening. Okay, but notice, no absolutism. No one has complete and utter power. Okay? At least they're not supposed to. Montesquieu is against absolutism. Which thinker would he disagree with? Obviously Thomas Hobbes, because he advocated for a strong absolute government. What effect did Montesquieu have on the United States? It should be really obvious to you. U.S. Constitution. Okay? And earlier in the year, when we had a Constitution Day, I went over the Constitution and showed you these items. But sets up 3 branches of government, just as Montesquieu recommended. That's what we have. Okay? And then we get to Voltaire. And I think Voltaire has one of the coolest names, Voltaire. Was another famous Enlightenment thinker. What was he famous for saying? And this is one of those statements that permeate history. I disapprove of what you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it. Freedom of speech. And this is something that people really, really get confused. Freedom of speech means exactly what it says. You can say whatever you want. Now, does that mean everything you're going to say is what you should say? Of course not. Does that mean everything you say is something proper? Of course. But you have a right to say it. And that's the point. There are a lot of things people say that offend me, that, I would disagree with, but they have a right to say it. Now, there are countries in the world where you do not have a right to say what you say, a right to believe what you want to believe, or even speak out. Okay? Notice, no matter what is happening, the United States, you have these fundamental rights: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments are created among men and derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Remember that. Very important. Okay? What does this quote defend? Freedom of speech and religion. See, in Europe, there were a lot of religious wars, and because people had different beliefs. Should not have happened, but it did. And so when the founders founded this country, they wanted to make sure government would never interfere with religion or the free practice of it. That is what the First Amendment says. Okay? What was Voltaire's opinion on the relationship between religion and the government? There should be a separation of church and state. See? In other words, the government should not be connected with church. Okay? Because you're going to have a problem. And we learned about this when we studied other cultures that had the government tied with their religion. This does not mean that you cannot have a belief system and be a part of government. It's just saying that government can't control the religion or favor of religion over any other. Okay? Government has to be neutral, right? Government should not have control over religion. It does not mean a person can't be religious in government. Got ahead of myself again. So remember that. So if you are a person that has a belief system, someday you want to run for public office, you want to be part of government, you can. And you can freely express your beliefs. And the government can't shut you down. Now, is that what actually happens? Obviously, there are people who think differently. There are constitutional scholars who say, nope, this is what it means. But if you go back to what the founders meant, their intent, that's what it meant. Okay? And there's enough writings that they wrote outside of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence that you can see what they meant. George Washington's farewell address, he states very clearly that in order for this great experiment, as they called it, the United States to work, he felt religion was needed to quell the passions of the people. In other words, keep them in line, because a moral system tells people right and wrong, and that will safeguard greed and selfishness and so on. All the things that people complain about, well, a person that has a strong belief in a religion that advocates for caring for people and not being selfish and such, they're not going to do it because that's what they believe. And if they go into government, that's fine. The government can't say, you can't do this, you can't do that. Hence why people are upset in the current state, because some people feel that government is intruding on their right to practice their beliefs. So, we'll leave it out there. I'm not giving you what I think. Just giving you the historical assessment of what is occurring. Who wrote The Social Contract? Another book you can read. Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. There's a guy when I was growing up named Jacques Cousteau. He do all these undersea videos. So when I see this, I always think of Jacques Cousteau. Hello. Right? What does he say about the social contract? It's a contract between the people and their rulers. So in other words, if our government is what we like, we vote, we re-elect them, what have you. If it's not, we vote someone else. Now, obviously, there are people who disagree. Notice the handshaking here, right? We're supposed to try to agree as much as we can, but obviously people have their own opinions. But that's what the social contract is. So here's how it looks, and you need to write this down in your notes. People give power to the government, kings, people we elect. The government protects their rights, almost like feudalism was. However, there's a difference. The government misuse their power, then the people replace or overthrow it, and we do this by voting. So it is in the best interest of the government to do what the people want, otherwise they get voted out. And that's always, you'll see people during election time all of a sudden promising things and saying things because they want to get reelected. Okay? And that's the idea being that, people gave me the power, well, I need to make sure I do what the people say. Because we have a representative government. We vote for people to represent us. Okay? So make sure you write this down. What does Rousseau say should happen if this contract is broken by the rulers? The people should rebel. And this is interesting because anytime people rebel, people get all upset. Well, there's a nice way of doing it and a bad way to do it. This is the French Revolution. They stormed the Bastille and they took all the stones and made something else. French Revolution, they killed everybody. Okay? That's not how you rebel. They wanted to change, but basically what happened was they opened the door for Napoleon to come in later on. We'll learn about that next year. Okay? So, let me go back to the way we rebel in our system is we vote. We can protest peaceably. That's in the Bill of Rights. And you change the government by voting people out that you don't think represent you. Okay, that's how it's supposed to work. We don't just get rid of everything. Okay? Now, there is a provision in the Declaration that if a government is destructive to that end, it is the right of the people to overthrow said government. People forget that clause. But remember, the Declaration of Independence is not the Constitution. It's the document that laid out the reasons for us leaving England. The Constitution is the founding document that this country lives by. Okay, the document that is the law of the land. Okay? Who are the 5 writers and thinkers from the Enlightenment? You should have this. So, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Baron de Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau. Okay? So very important. Who wrote the Declaration of Independence? This is a good one. Thomas Jefferson. And who influenced him? Obviously, John Locke. And you can go into whether or not Thomas Jefferson actually believed what he wrote and such. There's enough to say he did. Okay. Remember, no one was perfect. These gentlemen were not perfect humans. They were doing the best they could based upon the resources they had. Okay? And most historians, including myself, believe they did a very good job considering the circumstances they were under. Okay? Obviously, looking back at history, people always say, well, they should have done this. But here's the rule of history. You cannot take your modern ideas and place them back in history. Because had you lived back then, you would have done the same thing. Because there was no way to be different. And people have to remember that. Okay, when you go into high school and college and you have professors, remember that. You don't take what we know now and they were so evil and wrong. No, they did what they did. Now we can look at it and say it was evil and wrong. But they did what they did, and now we have to make better choices. That is what we should do. What were the effects of the Enlightenment? Fueled democratic revolutions around the world. American, French, Declaration of Independence, July 4th. Bastille, 1789. Applied reason to the human world. So make sure you have these written down. Government and law. Stimulated religious freedom and respect for all. It would be reasonable if we all just got along, wouldn't it? There's a gentleman who was an evangelical Christian person who was talking to the Pope, John Paul II. Okay? And anybody, you can go back and do your own research and figure these things out. And you can always email me if you have questions. You know that. Taught that our rights come from a creator through natural law, not the government. Okay? So that's what's called natural rights, the laws of nature. Okay? Make sure you have this written down. And of course, your favorite part of any lesson I do, the conclusion. Enlightenment was the final stage of the Renaissance. There has not been another time in history when so much was accomplished both in thought and action. 100% true. Even with the internet and all the things people do, still does not compare to the Enlightenment. These ideas became the basis for the American Revolution, French Revolution, and the many movements that have shaped our history for the last 500 years to the present. So this is important. If anything you pay attention to all school year, this is it. Because this is about your rights, your freedoms, your ideas, your ways of thinking. And it's important that you grasp these things. You know, I might leave this lesson up for, if any of you guys can always refer to it. Because this is it. This is the whole enchilada, as they would say. Everything going on right now. Are we free to do this or that? You decide based upon what you just learned. Okay? So this is Mr. Martinez saying happy May the 4th. Okay? And I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will bring out the saber again. Strength and honor.